Okay, people. So, man, the great team at DDA sent me a cross queer. Right, this is the latest film from Luca Guadagnino. Yeah, I feel I probably butchered his name. It is written by Justin Kuritzkes. The film is produced by Lorenzo Miley and Luca Guadagnino. It's executive produced by James Burroughs, Emanuela Macharanka, Elena Rashia, Peter Spears, Christian Vespa, and Justin Kuritzkes. It's associate produced by Zachary Fox, with line production from Ricardo Pintus. Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross do a great job with the score. Cinematography is from Sayumbu Mukdiprom. Marco Costa edits the piece. Jessica Ronan is down with the casting. We have Stefano Bazzi on production design, art direction. We have Baggio Fazzini, Virginia Gratatana, and Monica Salustio. Set decoration is Lisa Scupa and Lorenzo De Sicilis, with J.W. Anderson on costume design. Hair, makeup, prosthetics. We got Richard Redolfson, Fernanda Perez, Jairo Yada, Sebastian Malaski, Carmen Mendiaz, Lapina Nataskia, Chris Lyons, Masmino Gattabrossi, Jason Hammer, Adrian Dimas, Paolo Cristofanini, and Benedetta Del Zesio. So our cast: Daniel Craig is William Lee. Drew Starkey is Eugene Allerton. There's Jason Schwartzman as Joe Guidry. Rania Ava is Joan. Colin Bates is Tom Williams. Jim Cocken is played by David Lowery. Ariel Schulman is Tom Weston even. Drew Drange is John Duome. Dr. Cotter is played by Leslie Manville. Mr. Cotter is played by Lisandro Alassano. Mary is played by Andra Urusta. The Doctor is played by Michael Boromans. Bartender is played by Simon Rizzoni. Yeah, that's probably our main lot of people. The gist: William Lee, an American expat and heroin addict in Mexico City, spends his days almost entirely alone, except for a few contacts with other members of the small American community he lives in. His encounter with Eugene Allerton, an expat former soldier, makes him believe it might finally be possible to establish an intimate connection with somebody. Okay. I mean, I don't know if I feel that is completely true, you know? Yeah. One of those odd ones, right? Okay, we've got a director's kind of statement, not quite a statement, but so some words, right? How can a man who by other than sees and feels be other than sad? William Burroughs asks himself in the last entry of his personal diary before his death. In adapting his second novel, published almost 40 years after its completion, we have attempted to reply to this somber invocation by the great icon of the Beat generation. Lee loves Allerton, Allerton loves Lee, and they will manage to meet despite all the missteps and fears that act upon both in their picaresque journey through South America as projected by the mind of Burroughs. That's an interesting one, right? I feel that's an interesting one. And there's a lot to this, right? Because when I said about the synopsis, it's like he spends most of his time alone. I don't know if we fully get that because we see him interacting, right? There's this American community. He's got his friends, right, that he talks to and hangs with, right, such as Joe. But he's also he's on the prowl, right? He's always trying to seduce these younger guys. And we see it work with some of them, and others are just like, oh, man, it's hard being friends with Lee because he's always trying to get you in bed, right? So how much time he spends alone, it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. It's a very interesting film because it feels a little bit like an exploration, right? Because, yeah, he's a heroin addict, which we don't know at the beginning, right? There's this kind of trippy scene of like, and we're just kind of looking down at this table and we can see hands. And then as we pan out, we see Lee, and then he's just injecting up, right? And that's our first kind of indication of, I think. But yeah, it feels like it's this exploration of queerness and intimacy to a certain degree. Because as I said, like Lee's having these random encounters with people. And he's, there's one point where he's like talking to, actually, I think it's Allerton, right? And he's saying about the fact that the Lees have all been perverts throughout history. And, he found it difficult to embrace who he was because he just saw, like, I feel he's referring to drag queens and just like, I don't want to be that. Right? Is that what it is to be queer? And then he just like, so he talked to someone and they explained it and he just realized that, oh, no, he is fine, right? Being him. But it's kind of like these, him and Joe kind of turn their eyes up at these other gay guys, the Green Lanterns, which I'm kind of like, because we never know why they're called the Green Lanterns. But they kind of think that they're weird. Right? And Joe at one point goes, I just didn't want to be with this guy who's too queer. Right? So it just seems that, like kind of them exploring that. And then him, because we see him chatting to these other guys and trying to work out, are you gay or are you not gay? You know? And there's other people that are just like, oh, I'm not queer. But they've just had sex. So it's just like, okay. Right? And it's that kind of thing. Right? The whole Allerton situation, because it's just like he loves Allerton, Allerton loves him. I don't know if that's fully clear, because it feels more like this weird type of agreement. You know what I mean? Like it's one of those ones where you have those people that are just like, hey, if you haven't met someone by the time of this point, why don't we just be together? Or if you saw that High Fidelity, I mean, I love that film, right? And John Cusack, always forget the girl's name. She was in 6 Feet Under. She's in so many things. She's great. But they was both lonely. They both been dumped, and they just kind of fell into a relationship together. And they kind of just moping through life together until they kind of move on to new things, right? And that's what Lee and Allerton kind of seem like, right? That it doesn't necessarily feel like they're in love, but they're just transitioning through life until the next situation. You know? There's a lot of trippiness in this, right? There's this scene, and they're sitting, they're sitting watching a film, and it kind of feels like they're sitting up, and then you see one of them kind of lean across, but it's like that kind of weird, trippy strobe lighting when you move and you see that kind of trace of the thing move, but the thing itself kind of stays still. And so as he leans, we see this kind of trace lean across, right? And there's a lot of odd things like that, especially in the latter half of the film when you have this kind of drug trip. So it's just that. There's this other very odd moment with Joan. Right? Now, Joan, it's hard to know who Joan is, right? Because we see her with Allerton. You kind of feel that she's dating Allerton, seeing Allerton, because he seems to go to her a lot, but we don't know what that is, right? Which is kind of odd, because you're just like, okay, because when you have Allerton, I mean, like, I'm not queer. So it's just like, okay, so are you dating Joan, right? Are you sleeping with Joan? Are you seeing Joan, right? Is this the kind of duality of this thing that you are courting? But we don't know, right? Which is very odd. But there's this very weird scene with Joan where she's kind of hovering over a table with no legs, right? And you're just like, huh, okay, right? And it is hard to kind of like, what are we saying here? You know, there's that kind of thing. There are those moments where we have this kind of trippiness, and it's obviously symbolizing something, but sometimes you're just like, I don't know what it symbolizes. Maybe I'm just dumb. You know what I mean? It could be that, right? And other people are like, obviously, what they're trying to say here is this. And you're like, okay. But yeah, there's that. There is a lot of sex in the film. I mean, I say a lot. I don't know if I'd say it, if it is a lot. But there is some sex scenes. There is some full frontal. I wouldn't say it's overly gratuitous. I mean, there's definitely been crazier films, right? Definitely been crazier films. it's not, it doesn't necessarily seem loving a lot of the time. Like some things, there does seem to be more intimacy than others. There is this crazy scene where, yeah, they're filleting each other. Is filleting? Is that the word? Giving each other head, right? Huh. Might have used the wrong word. But anyway, they're giving his head. And he, no, one gives a head, the other gives a hand job, right? And then he wipes the cum on the dude's shirt. And no one says anything. And he's just like, wait, I mean, wipe it on the sheet. On the guy's shirt? That feels crazy. That feels crazy. But yeah, there's these weird things that are going on. These depictions of intimacy and love. At one point in the film, it's this exploration to try and find yucca, which is otherwise known as ayahuasca. Now we see them take the ayahuasca, which is I don't know. The portrayal of ayahuasca in this doesn't feel like anything that I've actually heard, right? Because a lot of the time people be like, yo, you take it and you're throwing up or shitting yourself, right? Or both, right? Sometimes it's one or the other, sometimes it's both. But that because you kind of purge your system. So I think the big thing is you don't necessarily want to eat before. So you purge your system, but then you go on these crazy trips. Crazy trip. Now, everyone's trip is different because you're kind of exploring this kind of thing, and people do use it, right, to get off drugs, to break addictions. But in this, we don't see any of that. And they kind of like allude to they both had the same experience, which is odd. Right? That whole thing was secrets was kind of odd with Dr. Carter and her husband. Right? It's very bizarre. And we have these scenes and people are very close when they're talking to each other. Right? It is this weird kind of look at personal space and intimacy throughout the film too. It's hard to say that I liked this film, right? But we do have these really great scenes, right? The way they've been crafted and constructed. You know, like the Reznor and Atticus's score is very hypnotic. And it's like the beginning half of the film is completely different from the end, you know? But it does seem to work. It does seem to fit everything that's going on, right? So we have those elements. Like, it's interesting as well because in the film, right, Daniel Craig. Now, he's been in so many roles, right? He's 56. Daniel Craig is 56. And if you think, like, this isn't that long after the last James Bond film he did, or the second Knives Out film, he looks a lot older in this, which I think is great. Like, embrace the age, right? Embrace the age. But he does look a lot older. So you have this kind of crazy transformation. And then at the end, we get him like very old. Because the film is kind of split into these 3 chapters, and then we get an epilogue at the end, right? I think it's 2 years later. Another weird kind of, like, yeah. Like, the journey these people are on is very odd, right? But it does kind of seem like there is this kind of final thought maybe on friendship with a character that, you know, like some things aren't always consistent, but you can rely on friends, maybe. I don't know. It's definitely an odd film, right? I think it's one of those ones that different people will get different things from it, you know? But yeah, it's an interesting construction. You know, the story doesn't necessarily make sense. I've never read William Burroughs' novel, which this is based on. It's an adaptation of, but it's a novella, supposedly, right? It was released in 1985. So, yeah, I don't know what that is. And from all accounts, it was never finished because he died. So they consulted, right? Guadagnino and Kuritzkes consulted with an executor of Burroughs' literary estate to work out how to end this film. So, yeah, it's an interesting one, people. Queer is definitely an interesting one. I guess if you are a fan of Guadagnino's, right, you enjoyed all of his previous work, then you'll probably want to see this for sure. If you like Daniel Craig or other members of the cast within the film, yeah, you'll want to see it. As I said, it's there is some frontal, there is, you know, sex in it. So it depends how you feel about that. There's the scene with Joan. There is a weird scene with Joan, where yeah, she's naked, and you do think, why? Like, I don't know if this is necessary. You know what I mean? Like, that was weird. The Viper, the weird kind of CGI Viper, because it didn't look real, so I'm assuming it's CGI. That was an odd one, right? There are these very weird moments in the film. The trippy moments are kind of interesting and fun. But yeah, like looking at yourself inside of something, right? There's a lot of that going on. So it's this interesting thing. I don't know if it needed to be over 2 hours, right? But again, I think if you're a fan of Luca Guadagnino, I think you could find this interesting. So it is dropping in cinemas this Friday, December the 13th. So yeah, if you're intrigued, you know what I mean? If you've been looking forward to this one for a while, then boom, Queer, it is now out. Enjoy.